The rain had been falling for 3 days straight when Victoria Ellis realized the stagecoach was not going to make it across the swollen creek to Fort Stockton, Texas, and her future husband was somewhere on the other side waiting for a bride who might never arrive. She clutched her carpetbag tighter as the driver shouted over the roar of rushing water that they would have to wait it out at the way station, a ramshackle building that looked like it might wash away at any moment. Victoria had traveled all the way from Boston, answering an advertisement from a shopkeeper named Harold Martin, who promised a comfortable life and a partnership built on mutual respect. But now she stood watching muddy water surge past with a force that seemed determined to keep her from her destiny. The other passengers huddled inside the drafty way station, their faces drawn with worry. An elderly couple heading to visit their daughter sat in one corner, the wife coughing into a handkerchief while her husband patted her shoulder. A traveling salesman paced near the window, cursing their luck. Victoria tried to remain calm, smoothing her dark blue traveling dress and checking that her letters from Harold were still safely tucked in her bag. She was 22 years old, an orphan who had worked as a seamstress in Boston until the opportunity for a new life presented itself. The thought of returning to that tiny room and endless needlework had made the risk of traveling to Texas to marry a stranger seem not just reasonable but necessary. The station keeper, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained teeth, informed them that the water showed no signs of receding. In fact, the creek was rising faster than he had seen in 15 years. Victoria felt her stomach drop. She had sent word to Harold about her arrival date, and he would be expecting her in Fort Stockton tomorrow. What would he think when she did not appear? Would he assume she had changed her mind? Would he find another bride? As night fell, the situation grew more dire. The water had reached the bottom steps of the way station, and the building creaked ominously with each gust of wind. The station keeper began moving supplies to higher ground, his movements growing more frantic. Victoria helped the elderly woman to a chair on the second floor, though the narrow stairs felt unsteady beneath their feet. Through the window, she could see nothing but darkness and rain, the world reduced to water and wind. Morning brought no relief. If anything, the storm had intensified. Victoria stood at the upstairs window, watching debris float past on the churning brown water. A chicken coop bobbed by, then part of a fence, then what looked like someone's front door. The way station was now an island in a vast lake that stretched as far as she could see. Her heart sank as she realized they might be trapped for days, possibly weeks. That was when she saw him. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks, that the rain and her desperation had conjured a mirage. But no, there was definitely a man on horseback approaching through the water. The horse was enormous, some kind of draft horse cross, and it moved steadily through water that reached halfway up its powerful chest. The rider sat tall in the saddle, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a long oilskin coat that shed water like a duck's back. The station keeper rushed to the window beside her. "Well, I'll be damned. That's Garrett Wilder from the Double W Ranch, craziest son of a gun in Pecos County, but if anyone can cross that water, it would be him and that monster horse of his." Victoria watched as the man and horse drew closer. She could see now that he had a rope tied to his saddle, the other end trailing behind him, secured to something on the far bank. He was using it to guide himself, to keep from being swept away by the current. It was the most reckless and brave thing she had ever witnessed. Garrett Wilder reached the way station and called up to the window. His voice was deep and carried easily over the sound of the rain. "How many folks you got in there, Pete?" "5, including myself," the station keeper yelled back. "We got an old woman who is not doing too well, a young lady, an old man, and a salesman. "I can take two at a time on Caesar here, but it will be tough going," Garrett said, patting his horse's thick neck. "The old couple should go first. I will come back for the others." Victoria felt a strange mixture of relief and fear. She watched as the elderly couple was helped down the stairs and out into the water. Garrett Wilder dismounted, and even from the window, Victoria could see he was tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the easy confidence of a man who knew his own strength. He lifted the elderly woman as if she weighed nothing, settling her in front of his saddle before helping her husband up behind. Then he mounted in one smooth motion, and the big horse turned back toward the distant shore. The wait for his return felt endless. Victoria paced the small room, wringing her hands. The salesman complained loudly about the delay, about the incompetence of the stage line, about the miserable state of Texas in general. The station keeper ignored him, watching the water level anxiously. When Garrett returned, he called up that he would take the salesman next, along with some of the station keeper's supplies. The salesman wasted no time scrambling down to meet him, clutching his sample case. Victoria watched the rescue operation with growing admiration. The current was fierce, and several times she saw the horse stumble, but Garrett seemed to anticipate every movement, shifting his weight to help the animal maintain balance. Man and horse worked together like they were one being. The third trip was for her and the station keeper. Victoria's hands trembled as she descended the stairs. The water was now inside the building, cold and murky, reaching her knees by the time she made it to the door. Garrett Wilder was there, reaching for her with strong hands. Up close, she could see he had gray eyes the color of storm clouds and a firm jaw shadowed with several days' worth of beard. He was perhaps 26 or 27, weathered by sun and wind but undeniably handsome in a rugged way that was nothing like the city men she had known in Boston. "I have got you, madam," he said, and then she was being lifted as easily as the elderly woman had been. He placed her in front of his saddle, and she felt the heat of him at her back despite the cold rain. "Hold onto the saddle horn and do not let go no matter what happens. Caesar knows what he is doing." The station keeper climbed up behind, adding his weight to the already burdened horse. Victoria gripped the saddle horn so tightly her knuckles went white. Garrett's arms came around her to hold the reins, creating a secure cage that made her feel simultaneously safe and acutely aware of her own racing heartbeat. "Walk on, Caesar," Garrett said quietly, and the horse stepped into the current. The world became water and motion. The horse moved steadily, but the current pulled at them with vicious strength. Victoria felt the animal slip once, twice, and her breath caught in her throat. Garrett's arms tightened around her, his voice low and calm as he spoke to the horse, praising and encouraging. She could feel the tension in his body, the way every muscle was engaged in keeping them balanced and on course. Something large slammed into them, a piece of debris that made the horse shy sideways. Victoria gasped, certain they would all be swept away, but Garrett guided Caesar back on line with subtle shifts of his weight and gentle pressure on the reins. She realized he was an extraordinary horseman, the kind of rider who seemed to communicate with his mount through thought alone. The crossing felt like it took hours, though it was probably only 15 or 20 minutes. When the horse finally found solid ground and climbed out of the swirling water, Victoria felt tears of relief streaming down her face, mixing with the rain. Garrett dismounted and lifted her down, his hands firm on her waist. For a moment they stood close together, and she looked up into those gray eyes and saw concern there. "You are safe now, madam," he said. "Can you walk?" Her legs felt like jelly, but she nodded. He kept one hand on her elbow, steadying her as they moved toward higher ground where several people waited with blankets and hot coffee. She recognized the elderly couple, already wrapped in quilts and looking much better. A young man who resembled Garrett rushed forward. "Garrett, that was the craziest thing I have ever seen you do, and that is saying something," the young man said, throwing a blanket around his brother's shoulders. Then he turned to Victoria with a friendly grin. "Madam, I am James Wilder, this fool's younger brother. Let us get you somewhere warm and dry." They were taken to a large ranch house that sat on a hill overlooking the flooded valley. The house was solid and well built, with a wide porch and smoke rising from multiple chimneys. A woman in her 50s came bustling out, clucking her tongue at their bedraggled state. "Inside, all of you. I have got hot water for baths and stew on the stove." "Garrett Wilder, you are going to catch your death of cold one of these days with your heroics," she scolded, but her eyes were warm with affection. "This is Mrs. Henderson, our housekeeper and the woman who raised us after our mother passed," Garrett said to Victoria. "Mrs. Henderson, this is—" He paused, realizing he did not know her name. "Victoria Ellis," she said. "I am very grateful to you, Mr. Wilder, to all of you." Mrs. Henderson took charge of Victoria immediately, leading her upstairs to a bedroom and ordering hot water for a bath. "You are from back east by your accent," she observed as she helped Victoria out of her wet clothes. "What brings you to Texas in the middle of spring flooding?" Victoria hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "I am a mail-order bride. I was supposed to meet my intended in Fort Stockton, but the stage could not cross." "Who is your intended?" Mrs. Henderson asked, wrapping her in a warm robe. "Harold Martin. He owns a dry goods store." Mrs. Henderson's expression flickered with something Victoria could not quite read. "I know Harold. He is a decent enough man, I suppose. A bit older, set in his ways." Victoria knew from Harold's letters that he was 43, more than twice her age, but he had seemed kind in his correspondence. He had written about his shop, about his desire for a helpmate and companion, about the comfortable life he could provide. She had not expected romance, only stability and purpose. The bath was heavenly, washing away the cold and fear of the last few days. Mrs. Henderson brought her a simple dress to wear, one that had belonged to Garrett's mother. It fit reasonably well, though Victoria was taller than the previous owner. When she came downstairs, her hair still damp but braided neatly, she found the other rescued passengers gathered in the large dining room. Garrett had changed into dry clothes, and she was struck again by how handsome he was, though he carried himself with none of the self-importance she had seen in good-looking men back east. The meal was simple but delicious. Beef stew with fresh bread and apple pie for dessert. Garrett sat at the head of the table, and Victoria found herself seated to his right. His brother James, who was perhaps 23, entertained them with stories about ranch life. But Victoria noticed that Garrett was quiet, watching the windows as rain continued to hammer against the glass. "How long do you think before the water recedes?" the station keeper asked. Garrett shook his head. "This is worse than the flood of '74. Could be a week or more before it is safe to travel. The main road to Fort Stockton will be underwater for days yet." Victoria's heart sank. Harold would think she was not coming. She had no way to send word, no way to let him know what had happened. "Is there no way to get a message through?" she asked. "Not until the water goes down," Garrett said, his eyes meeting hers. There was something in his gaze that made her breath catch, an intensity that seemed to see right through her. "I am sorry. I know you must be anxious to reach your intended." That night, Victoria lay in the comfortable bed in the guest room and stared at the ceiling, listening to the rain. She thought about Harold Martin, tried to picture their life together running his shop, and found her mind wandering instead to gray eyes and strong hands, to the feeling of safety she had experienced in Garrett Wilder's arms as they crossed the flood. She told herself it was only natural, that he had saved her life, and she was confusing gratitude with attraction. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. The next morning dawned without rain for the first time in days, though the sky remained heavy with clouds. Victoria woke to find the household already stirring. She dressed quickly and went downstairs to find Mrs. Henderson in the kitchen. "Good morning, dear. Did you sleep well?" the older woman asked, handing her a cup of coffee. "Very well, thank you. Is there anything I can do to help?" "I feel terrible imposing on your hospitality." Mrs. Henderson smiled. "Nonsense. But if you want to make yourself useful, I would not say no to help with the mending. The men on this ranch go through clothes faster than I can fix them." Victoria spent the morning in the bright parlor with a basket of mending, falling easily into the familiar work. She had made her living with a needle for years, and her stitches were small and neat. Mrs. Henderson worked beside her, and they talked easily about Boston, about the ranch, about life in Texas. "Garrett is a good man," Mrs. Henderson said seemingly out of nowhere. "After his parents died, he kept this ranch going when he was barely 18. James was just a boy, and Garrett could have sold out, gone somewhere easier. But he loved this land, and he raised his brother right. He has had his share of admirers in town, but he never seemed interested in settling down. Too married to the ranch, I suppose." Victoria felt her cheeks warm, wondering if the older woman had noticed her watching Garrett at breakfast. "He seems very dedicated," she said carefully. "He is, sometimes too dedicated. He forgets there is more to life than cattle and horses." Mrs. Henderson gave her a meaningful look. "But maybe that is changing." Before Victoria could respond, James burst into the room. "Miss Ellis, you should come see the foals. We have got 2 that were born just last week, and they are the sweetest things you have ever seen." Grateful for the distraction, Victoria set aside her mending and followed James to the barn. The building was large and well-maintained, with horses nickering from their stalls. James led her to a box stall where a mare stood with a tiny bay foal at her side. The baby was all legs and curiosity, coming right up to the stall door to investigate the visitors. "He is beautiful," Victoria breathed, reaching out to let the foal sniff her hand. "His mama is one of our best mares, and the sire is Caesar, the horse that carried you across yesterday," James explained. "Garrett has been building up his horse breeding operation for years. These draft crosses are perfect for ranch work, strong enough to pull wagons but with enough speed and agility for working cattle." They moved to the next stall where a filly stood with another mare. This baby was more cautious, hiding behind her mother and peering out with large dark eyes. Victoria laughed at her antics and James grinned. "That one is going to be trouble, you can tell already. Got her mama's stubborn streak." A voice came from behind them. "You complaining about Daisy again, little brother?" Victoria turned to find Garrett leaning against a stall door, his hat pushed back on his head. In the dim light of the barn, he looked relaxed in a way he had not been in the house, like this was where he was most himself. "Just stating facts," James said cheerfully. "I was showing Miss Ellis the foals." "I hope he is not boring you with too many horse details," Garrett said, moving closer. "James can talk about breeding lines and bloodlines until your ears fall off." "Not at all. I find it fascinating," Victoria said honestly. "In Boston, I rarely saw horses except pulling carriages. I never thought about where they came from or how they were trained." Garrett's expression softened. "Would you like to see more of the operation? We have got time before lunch." They spent the next hour touring the ranch, with Garrett explaining his plans for expanding the horse breeding program. He spoke with passion about his animals, about the careful selection of bloodlines to create horses that were both strong and intelligent. Victoria found herself drawn into his enthusiasm, asking questions that seemed to please him. He showed her the pastures where mares grazed with their foals, the training corrals where young horses learned their jobs, the hay barns and equipment sheds that kept the operation running. "You have built something remarkable here," she said as they stood on a hill overlooking the ranch. The floodwaters were visible in the distance, a reminder of why she was here, but up on this high ground, everything felt peaceful and right. "It has been my life's work," Garrett said quietly. "Sometimes I wonder if I have focused on it too much, if I have missed out on other things." He looked at her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression. "When I saw that way station surrounded by water yesterday, all I could think was that people were in danger and I had to help. But when I saw you—" He paused, seeming to struggle for words. "I'm not good at talking about feelings, Miss Ellis. I am better with horses than people, but I want you to know that I am very glad you are safe." Victoria's heart hammered in her chest. She knew she should step back, remind him that she was promised to another man, but she could not make herself move. "I am glad, too," she whispered. For a long moment they stood there, the air between them charged with possibility. Then Garrett seemed to shake himself, stepping back and putting proper distance between them. "We should get back for lunch. Mrs. Henderson gets cranky when we are late." The next few days fell into a strange, suspended routine. The floodwaters remained high, making travel impossible. The elderly couple decided to stay at the ranch until they could continue to their daughter's place. The salesman grew increasingly impatient, but there was nothing anyone could do but wait. Victoria helped Mrs. Henderson with household tasks during the day and found herself spending more and more time with Garrett in the evenings. They would sit on the porch after supper, watching the sun set over the flooded valley, and talk for hours. Garrett told her about growing up on the ranch, about his parents who had worked themselves to exhaustion building something lasting. He spoke of his fears when they died, of the responsibility of raising James and keeping the ranch afloat. Victoria shared stories of her own childhood, of losing her parents to illness when she was 16, of the loneliness of working endless hours in the textile mill until her eyes ached. "I wanted more," she admitted one evening. "Not riches or luxury, just a home, a family. Something that was mine." "Is that why you answered Harold's advertisement?" Garrett asked, his voice carefully neutral. Victoria nodded. "He seemed kind in his letters, practical. He was honest about what he wanted, a helpmate more than a wife. I thought that was realistic, more likely to succeed than marrying for love." She laughed softly. "My mother married for love and they were very poor. They were happy, but after they died, I saw how hard life could be without security." "And now," Garrett asked, "do you still think that way?" She looked at him, at the strong planes of his face in the fading light, and felt her carefully constructed plans crumbling. "I am not sure what I think anymore," she said honestly. Garrett reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and gentle. "Victoria, I know you are promised to Harold. I know I have no right to say this, but these past few days with you have been. I have felt something I have not felt before. I do not want you to marry him if you are not certain." "I barely know you," Victoria said, but she did not pull her hand away. "I know. And maybe I am crazy, maybe this is just the strangeness of the situation, but I would like the chance to court you properly, to see if what I think I am feeling is real." He looked down at their joined hands. "Harold is a decent man, but he is not looking for love. You deserve more than decent. You deserve someone who will cherish you." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her like this before, with such raw honesty. "I do not know what to say. Do not say anything yet. Just think about it. When the waters recede and we can get you to Fort Stockton, talk to Harold. See how you feel. If you still want to marry him, I will respect that. But if you have doubts, if you think there might be something between us worth exploring, I will be waiting." The rain returned that night. Not the violent downpour of before, but a steady drizzle that went on for 2 more days. The floodwaters remained high, and Victoria found herself in an agony of indecision. She would watch Garrett working with his horses, his patience and skill evident in every movement, and feel her heart pull toward him. Then she would remember Harold waiting in Fort Stockton, the promises she had made, the practical life she had planned, and feel guilty for her wavering emotions. Mrs. Henderson noticed her turmoil. One afternoon, as they worked together in the kitchen, the older woman said gently, "You care for him, do not you?" Victoria did not pretend to misunderstand. "It does not matter. I made a commitment to Harold Martin." "Commitments made sight unseen can be unmade," Mrs. Henderson said. "Victoria, I have known Harold for years. He is not a bad man, but he is cold. He wants a housekeeper and shopkeeper, not a wife. He had a mail-order bride 5 years ago. Did he tell you that?" Victoria's head snapped up. "No. He never mentioned it." Mrs. Henderson sighed. "She was a sweet girl from Ohio. She lasted 6 months before she left him. He worked her from dawn to dusk in that shop, never a kind word or a moment of tenderness. She ended up marrying a rancher from over Alpine Way, a man who actually loved her." "Why did Harold not mention this in his letters?" Victoria asked, feeling cold. "Because he probably does not think it matters. In his mind, that girl failed in her duties. He is looking for someone more resilient, more willing to accept a loveless arrangement." Mrs. Henderson took Victoria's hands. "I am not telling you this to gossip. I am telling you because you deserve to know what you would be walking into. And because I have seen how Garrett looks at you and how you look at him. I have known that boy since he was 15 years old, and I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." That evening, Garrett asked Victoria to walk with him despite the drizzle. They stood in the barn, listening to the rain on the roof and the peaceful sounds of horses eating their evening hay. Garrett seemed nervous, running his hand through his hair in a gesture Victoria had come to recognize. "The water is going down," he said. "Probably be passable in another day or 2. Victoria's stomach dropped. "Oh, I meant what I said before, Victoria. I do not want to pressure you, but I need you to know how I feel." He turned to face her fully. "I am falling in love with you. Maybe I am already in love with you. I know it is fast. I know it seems crazy, but I have never been more certain of anything except my love for this ranch and my brother. When I think about you leaving, about you marrying Harold and spending your life in that shop, I feel like I cannot breathe." Tears spilled down Victoria's cheeks. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "But I do not know what to do. I made a promise. Harold paid for my travel. He is expecting me. Then we go to Fort Stockton and you talk to him. You explain the situation. If he is the good man you think he is, he will understand. If he is not, then you deserve to know that too." Garrett stepped closer, cupping her face in his hands. "I am not asking you to run away or hide. I am asking you to be honest about your feelings with him and with yourself. What if he insists I honor my commitment?" Victoria asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "Then I will let you go," Garrett said, his voice rough with emotion. "I will not force you or make you feel obligated, but I hope, I pray, that you will choose me, choose us. Choose the possibility of real love instead of a practical arrangement." Victoria looked up at him, at this strong, kind man who had carried her through floodwaters and into a future she had not imagined. She reached up and pulled his face down to hers, kissing him with all the confused longing in her heart. Garrett made a sound of surprise that turned into a groan, his arms coming around her and pulling her close. The kiss was everything she had not known she was missing, tender and passionate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes?" he asked. "It is a maybe," Victoria said, managing a shaky laugh. "It is I need to talk to Harold and do the right thing, but I am hoping with all my heart that the right thing leads back to you." 2 days later, the waters had receded enough for travel. Garrett saddled Caesar and another large horse, insisting on escorting Victoria to Fort Stockton himself. James tried to convince him to take a wagon, but Garrett pointed out that the roads were still too muddy. On horseback, they could navigate around the worst spots. They set out at dawn, Victoria riding the second horse, a gentle giant named Hercules who took care of his rider with the same patient intelligence as Caesar. The journey to Fort Stockton normally took 4 hours by stage, but on horseback, picking their way around flooded areas and muddy roads, it took most of the day. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat the lunch Mrs. Henderson had packed. Sitting on a fallen log, watching the horses graze, Victoria felt a strange sense of peace despite the difficult conversation that awaited her. "Whatever happens," Garrett said, "I want you to know that meeting you these days we have had together, they have meant everything to me." "To me too," Victoria said, taking his hand. "I have never felt this way before, Garrett. It scares me how much I care about you in such a short time." "Love is not always logical," he said. "I think sometimes the deepest feelings come fastest, like they were just waiting for the right person to wake them up." They reached Fort Stockton in late afternoon. The town was small but bustling, with a main street lined with shops and businesses. Garrett led them to Martin's Dry Goods, a neat building with large front windows displaying various merchandise. He helped Victoria down from Hercules, his hands lingering on her waist. "I will wait out here," he said. "Take all the time you need." Victoria nodded, squared her shoulders, and walked into the shop. A bell above the door jingled, and a man emerged from the back room. Harold Martin was tall and thin, with graying hair and a stern face. He looked at Victoria with no recognition. "May I help you?" he asked in a clipped voice. "Mr. Martin, I am Victoria Ellis. I apologize for my late arrival. The stage was stranded by the flood." Harold's expression did not warm. "Miss Ellis, you were expected days ago. I had assumed you changed your mind." "I am very sorry. There was no way to send word." Victoria felt her nervousness increase. There was no warmth in this man, no concern for what she had been through. "I was rescued by a local rancher and his family. They were very kind." "I see. Well, you are here now. We can proceed with the marriage as planned." Harold looked her up and down with the same assessing gaze he might give merchandise. "You appear healthy and capable. That is good. I need someone who can work hard. The shop keeps long hours." Victoria felt her resolve hardening. This was not a man who would ever love her, who would ever see her as more than an employee. "Mr. Martin, I need to speak with you honestly about something." Harold frowned. "If this is about accommodations, you will have a room above the shop. It is small but adequate." "It is not about accommodations. During my time at the Wilder Ranch, I became acquainted with the man who rescued me, Garrett Wilder. I have developed feelings for him and he for me." Victoria forced herself to meet Harold's eyes. "I cannot in good conscience marry you when my heart belongs to someone else." Harold's face flushed red. "You developed feelings. In a few days. This is ridiculous. We have an agreement, Miss Ellis. I paid for your travel from Boston. You signed a contract." "I will repay every cent," Victoria said firmly. It may take me time, but I will work and send you the money. I am truly sorry, Mr. Martin, but I cannot marry you. It would not be fair to either of us." "Fair?" Harold's voice rose. "You lead me on, you accept my money and my offer, and then you throw it back in my face for some cowboy you barely know. This is breach of contract, Miss Ellis. I could have you arrested." The shop door opened, and Garrett stepped inside. He did not say anything, just stood there, but his presence was commanding. Harold looked at him and seemed to deflate slightly. "Mr. Martin," Garrett said calmly, "Victoria has offered to repay you. That is more than fair. You cannot force someone to marry you. If you want to take legal action, you are welcome to try, but I think you will find that no judge is going to enforce a mail-order bride contract against a woman's will." Harold glared at both of them. "You are making a mistake, Miss Ellis. Cowboy romances do not last. You will be sorry when you are living in poverty on some failing ranch." "My ranch is not failing," Garrett said, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel. "And Victoria will never want for anything as my wife. Now, I think this conversation is over. Miss Ellis has made her decision." They left the shop, and Victoria realized she was shaking. Garrett helped her onto Hercules, then mounted Caesar. They rode out of town in silence until they were well away from curious eyes. Then Garrett stopped, and Victoria did too. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Victoria laughed, feeling giddy with relief and terror and joy. "I just broke my engagement and possibly put myself in legal trouble. I should be devastated, but all I feel is free." Garrett grinned, and it transformed his serious face into something boyish and beautiful. "So does that mean you are choosing me?" "I am choosing you," Victoria said, and saying it out loud made it real, made it true. "I am choosing love over practicality, possibility over security. I am choosing you, Garrett Wilder." He was off his horse in seconds, lifting her down from Hercules and spinning her around. When he set her on her feet, he kissed her thoroughly, and Victoria kissed him back with all the hope and joy in her heart. When they finally broke apart, both laughing, the sun was setting behind them, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. They rode back to the ranch under the stars, taking their time, talking about everything and nothing. Garrett told her about his plans for the ranch, asking her opinion on things he had never discussed with anyone else. Victoria shared her dreams of having a real home, children, a life filled with purpose and love. They discovered they both wanted a large family, that they both loved early mornings and the smell of coffee, that they could talk for hours and never run out of things to say. When they reached the ranch house, Mrs. Henderson was waiting on the porch. She took one look at their faces and smiled. "I will get the guest room ready for Victoria. I assume there will be a wedding to plan." "As soon as possible," Garrett said, looking at Victoria. "If that is all right with you, as soon as possible," Victoria agreed. The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind. Garrett took Victoria to town to meet the minister and arrange for the wedding. They stopped at the general store for fabric, and Victoria spent her evening sewing a simple but beautiful wedding dress in cream-colored muslin with lace at the collar and cuffs. Mrs. Henderson helped her, sharing stories about Garrett's mother and how happy she would have been to see her son so in love. James threw himself into wedding preparations with enthusiasm, declaring he would make sure it was the best party Fort Stockton had ever seen. He invited everyone from miles around, insisting that the whole county would want to celebrate. Garrett tried to rein in his brother's enthusiasm, but Victoria laughed and told him to let James have his fun. Victoria wrote to Harold Martin, including a promissory note for the amount he had spent on her travel. She also wrote to her friends in Boston, telling them about her unexpected change in plans. She knew the Boston ladies would be scandalized, but she did not care. She had found something more precious than their approval. The wedding took place on a beautiful May morning in the small church in Fort Stockton. Victoria wore her cream dress and carried wildflowers that Garrett had picked himself that morning. He stood at the altar in his best suit, looking nervous and happy and so handsome that Victoria felt her breath catch. James stood as his best man, grinning widely. Mrs. Henderson wept openly in the front pew. As Victoria walked down the aisle, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. The rain, the flood, the fear and uncertainty. If the storm had not come, if the waters had not risen, she would have married Harold Martin and never known this feeling, this absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Garrett took her hand as she reached him, and his grip was warm and steady. The minister spoke about love and commitment, about two becoming one, but Victoria barely heard the words. She was lost in Garrett's eyes, in the promise she saw there. When the minister said, "You may kiss your bride," Garrett did so tenderly, reverently, and the small church erupted in applause and cheers. They walked back down the aisle together, husband and wife, and Victoria felt like her heart might burst with happiness. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food enough to feed an army. James had been right. It seemed like the whole county had turned out. Victoria met ranchers and shopkeepers, farmers and their wives, all welcoming her warmly to the community. Several women told her in whispers that they had been hoping Garrett would find someone, that he deserved happiness after all his hard work. As evening fell and lanterns were lit, Garrett pulled Victoria onto the makeshift dance floor. She had never danced much, but he led her easily and she followed his steps, laughing when she stumbled. They swayed together under the stars, surrounded by well-wishers but aware only of each other. "Happy," Garrett murmured against her hair. "Happier than I have ever been," Victoria said honestly. "I love you, Garrett Wilder." "I love you too, Victoria Wilder." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes shining. "I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." "I could never regret it," she said, reaching up to touch his face. "You carried me home, Garrett. Through the flood, through my fears and doubts, you carried me home." Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. Victoria had to learn ranch life, which was vastly different from her city upbringing. She burned her first attempt at cooking over an open hearth, nearly got kicked helping Garrett with a difficult mare, and spent weeks with her hands covered in blisters from unfamiliar work. But she learned quickly, and Garrett was endlessly patient, teaching her about horses and cattle, about reading the weather and the land. Victoria brought her own skills to the ranch. She took over the household accounts and discovered she had a head for numbers. She reorganized the kitchen and larder, making everything more efficient. She started sewing shirts and bedding that they could sell in town, bringing in extra income. Garrett marveled at her ability to see what needed doing and do it without complaint. More than that, they were happy. Deliriously, wonderfully happy. They would wake before dawn and watch the sunrise together, drinking coffee on the porch. They worked side by side during the day, and at night they lay in each other's arms, talking and laughing and making love with a passion that never seemed to fade. Garrett told her things he had never shared with anyone, his fears and dreams and hopes. Victoria opened her heart completely, trusting him with all the broken and beautiful parts of herself. Mrs. Henderson watched them with satisfaction. "I knew from the moment I saw you together," she told Victoria. "You were meant for each other. Anyone with eyes could see it." James teased them mercilessly about being lovebirds, but he was clearly delighted to see his brother so happy. He and Victoria developed a warm friendship, and she enjoyed his easy humor and infectious enthusiasm. 8 months after the wedding, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. She told Garrett one evening as they sat watching the sunset, and he reacted with such pure joy that she burst into tears. He held her, his own eyes wet, and they marveled together at the miracle growing inside her. The pregnancy was not easy. Victoria was sick for months, barely able to keep food down. Garrett worried himself nearly to death, hovering over her and insisting she rest constantly. Mrs. Henderson finally ordered him out of the house one day, telling him his anxious energy was making things worse. But Victoria loved him for his concern, for the way he brought her soda crackers and ginger tea, for the way he rubbed her swollen feet every evening. As her belly grew, Victoria sometimes thought about the life she might have had with Harold Martin. Would she have had children with him? Would he have been kind during her pregnancy, or would he have expected her to work in the shop until the moment of birth? She shuddered at the thought and thanked God and the floodwaters that had brought her to Garrett instead. Their son was born on a cold January night in 1883. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Garrett paced the hallway outside their bedroom, certain he would lose her. But Victoria was strong, and when the baby finally arrived, red-faced and wailing, she laughed through her tears of exhaustion. They named him Matthew Wilder, after Garrett's father. He had Garrett's gray eyes and Victoria's dark hair, and both parents agreed he was the most beautiful baby ever born. Garrett held his son with shaking hands, his face filled with wonder. "I cannot believe he is ours," he whispered. "I cannot believe I am this lucky." Victoria watched her husband cradle their child and felt her heart overflow. This was what she had been searching for when she answered that advertisement, though she had not known it then. Not just security or companionship, but this. A family built on love, a home filled with laughter and warmth, a partner who cherished her and children they would raise together. Matthew was a healthy, happy baby who grew strong and sturdy. When he was 6 months old, Victoria discovered she was pregnant again. Garrett was thrilled, though he worried even more this time, having seen how difficult the first pregnancy had been. But this one was easier, and their daughter Grace was born the following spring with much less drama than her brother. Grace had Victoria's green eyes and Garrett's stubborn chin. She was a determined baby from the start, refusing to sleep unless someone held her and screaming her displeasure when things did not go her way. James declared she was going to be a handful, and Victoria and Garrett could only agree, laughing at their daughter's fierce personality. Life on the ranch settled into a happy rhythm. Matthew toddled after his father, desperate to help with the horses even at 2 years old. Grace learned to walk early, the better to keep up with her brother. Garrett's horse breeding operation thrived, with buyers coming from all over Texas and beyond to purchase his carefully bred animals. Victoria's sewing business grew too, and she began training other ranch wives in her techniques, creating a small cooperative that brought in steady income. They added on to the ranch house, building more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Mrs. Henderson declared she was getting too old to keep up with 2 young children and talked about retiring, but neither Victoria nor Garrett would hear of it. She was family, and family stayed together. On their 5th anniversary, Garrett took Victoria on a picnic to the place where he had first told her he loved her. The children stayed with Mrs. Henderson and James, giving them a rare day alone. They ate lunch and talked about how much had changed since that first terrifying flood crossing. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had married Harold?" Garrett asked, lying back in the grass with his head in her lap. Victoria ran her fingers through his hair, smiling. "Sometimes, but only to remind myself how lucky I am. I would have had a roof over my head and food to eat, but I would never have known this feeling. I would never have known what it is to be truly, deeply loved." Garrett sat up and pulled her into his arms. "I love you more now than I did the day we married, and I did not think that was possible. You have given me everything, Victoria. A family, a home, a reason to come in from the fields every evening. You made my house into something more than just a place to sleep." They made love there in the grass, tender and passionate, celebrating 5 years of marriage and the promise of many more to come. As they lay together afterward, Victoria looked up at the sky and offered a silent prayer of thanks for the storm that had changed her life. Over the next years, their family continued to grow. Another son, Thomas, was born when Matthew was 5 and Grace was 3. Then twin girls, Sarah and Rebecca, came along 3 years later, sending the household into cheerful chaos. Garrett built more rooms and the ranch house sprawled across the hilltop, filled with noise and laughter and love. Matthew showed his father's talent with horses, spending every spare moment in the barn or pastures. Grace had inherited both her parents' stubbornness and her mother's head for numbers, declaring at age 7 that she would run the ranch's business when she grew up. Thomas was quiet and thoughtful, preferring books to horses, which both parents encouraged. The twins were too young yet to show clear personalities, but they were happy babies who adored their older siblings. James eventually married a schoolteacher from Fort Stockton, a sweet woman named Catherine who fit perfectly into the family. They built a house on the far side of the ranch and had 3 children of their own. The two families celebrated every holiday and birthday together, and the children grew up more like siblings than cousins. Mrs. Henderson finally did retire, though she moved into a cottage on the ranch property and continued to visit daily, unable to stay away from the family she loved. Garrett and Victoria hired younger help, but no one could replace Mrs. Henderson's wisdom and warm heart. One day, when Victoria was 35 and Garrett 39, they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Matthew, now 13, was teaching 8-year-old Thomas how to rope a fence post. Grace, at 11, was bossing her younger siblings around as usual, organizing them into some elaborate game. The twins, at 5, were picking wildflowers to bring to their mother. "Can you believe this is our life?" Victoria asked, leaning against Garrett's shoulder. "Some days, no," he admitted. "Some days I still feel like that scared kid who was not sure he could keep the ranch running, let alone build a family. Then I look at you and our children, and I know I did something right." Victoria turned to look at him, this man who had crossed floodwaters to save her and ended up saving her in ways he could never have imagined. His hair was threaded with gray now, his face more lined, but his eyes were still that same storm cloud gray that had captivated her. "We did something right," she corrected. "This life we built it together." Garrett kissed her soft and sweet, the kind of kiss that still made her heart flutter after 13 years of marriage. "Together," he agreed, "always together." That evening, after the children were in bed, Garrett pulled out a letter that had arrived that day. He handed it to Victoria with a strange expression. She unfolded it and read, her eyes widening. It was from Harold Martin. After all these years, he had written to inform them that the debt was paid in full. Victoria had been sending him small amounts every month for years, determined to honor her promise despite Garrett's protests that she did not owe the man anything. Harold's letter was brief and formal, but at the end, he had added a personal note. "I must admit that I was very angry when you broke our agreement, Miss Ellis, but I have watched from afar as you and your husband built a successful life together. I recently married again myself, to a widow who is content with a practical arrangement. Seeing you and your family in church on Sundays, witnessing your obvious happiness, has made me realize that perhaps you were right to follow your heart. I wish you and your family continued prosperity. Harold Martin. Victoria looked up at Garrett, tears in her eyes. He understood in the end. Took him long enough, Garrett said, but he was smiling. Though I cannot blame him for being angry. If I had been engaged to you and you had chosen someone else, I would have been devastated. Victoria laughed and set the letter aside. Well, that was never going to happen. From the moment you rode through that flood to save me, I think my heart knew you were the one. I just had to catch up with it. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow. Mrs. Henderson passed away peacefully in her sleep at age 78, and the whole family mourned the loss of the woman who had been mother and grandmother to them all. James and Catherine's oldest son went to college back east, the first in the family to do so. One of Garrett's prize mares died giving birth, and he mourned her loss deeply. Though the foal survived and grew into a magnificent animal, through it all, Victoria and Garrett remained each other's anchors. They celebrated 20 years of marriage, then 25. Matthew grew into a fine horseman who took over more and more of the day-to-day ranch operations. Grace shocked everyone by marrying a lawyer and moving to Dallas, though she visited often and managed the ranch's legal affairs from afar. Thomas became a teacher, opening a school on the ranch for the children of ranch hands and neighboring families. The twins, Sarah and Rebecca, were inseparable and showed talent in training horses that rivaled their fathers. On their 30th anniversary, Garrett surprised Victoria with a trip to Boston. She had not been back since she left to become a mail-order bride, and she was curious to see how the city had changed. They spent a week there, visiting the old neighborhoods where she had lived and worked. The city felt foreign now, too crowded and noisy after 3 decades on the ranch. I cannot believe I lived here, Victoria said as they walked through the busy streets. It seems like another lifetime. It was another lifetime, Garrett said, holding her hand. You were a different person then, and so was I. They visited the textile mill where she had worked. It was still there, still churning out cloth with the same relentless rhythm. Victoria stood outside and tried to remember the girl she had been, desperate and lonely and dreaming of escape. That girl had answered an advertisement from a stranger, had climbed onto a stagecoach heading to an unknown future, had been willing to marry without love for the promise of security. I would not be who I am without that girl, Victoria said softly. But I am so grateful I do not have to be her anymore. Garrett wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her head. I am grateful that girl had the courage to leave. I am grateful for the flood that stranded you. I am grateful for every moment that led you to me. They returned to Texas and the ranch, to their children and grandchildren, to the life they had built from floodwaters and faith and love. As they rode up the long drive to the house, Victoria looked at the sprawling building with its additions and improvements, at the well-tended pastures and strong fences, at the barns and corrals that represented years of hard work and dedication. Welcome home, Garrett said, helping her down from the wagon. Home, Victoria repeated, and the word was everything. It was the ranch and the family and the man beside her. It was 30 years of laughter and tears, struggle and triumph, ordinary days and extraordinary moments. It was the life she had been searching for when she stepped onto that stagecoach, though she had not known exactly what she was looking for. They were met by a crowd of family. Matthew and his wife with their 4 children, Grace visiting from Dallas with her lawyer husband and 2 daughters, Thomas and his wife, a fellow teacher, with their son, the twins, now 23 and running the horse training program, both engaged to nice young men from neighboring ranches, James and Catherine with their grown children and grandchildren. The house rang with noise and activity, with children running and adults talking and dinner being prepared. Victoria and Garrett stood in the middle of it all, watching the family they had created, and shared a look of perfect understanding. That night, after everyone had finally gone to bed or headed to their own homes, Victoria and Garrett sat on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. The stars were bright overhead, and the air was warm with the promise of summer. "You remember the first time we sat here together?" Garrett asked. "You were still promised to Harold, and I had no right to tell you how I felt, but I could not help myself." "I remember," Victoria said. "I was terrified and excited and so confused. I had never felt that way before. And now," Victoria smiled, "now I feel grateful, blessed. I look at our life, our family, everything we have built together, and I cannot imagine having it any other way. You gave me everything I was looking for and so much more than I knew to want." Garrett pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. In the distance, a horse whinnied, and somewhere an owl hooted. The sounds of the ranch of home surrounded them like a blanket. "I love you, Victoria Wilder," Garrett said. "Every day for 30 years, and I will love you for 30 more if we are blessed with that much time." "I love you too," Victoria said. "Thank you for crossing the flood to find me. Thank you for carrying me home." They sat there until the moon rose high, two people who had been strangers brought together by disaster and transformed by love. The girl from Boston and the Texas rancher, as different as two people could be, but perfectly matched nonetheless. The flood that had stranded Victoria had been the best thing that ever happened to her, because it had led her to Garrett, to this ranch, to this beautiful, complicated, wonderful life. In the months and years that followed, they continued to watch their family grow and change. Matthew eventually took over full operation of the ranch, with his father's blessing and guidance. The twins married in a double wedding that was the talk of Pecos County for years. Thomas's school expanded to serve children from miles around, becoming known for its excellent education and warm atmosphere. Victoria started writing down the family stories, wanting to preserve them for future generations. She wrote about the flood and the rescue, about falling in love with Garrett, about building the ranch and raising their children. She wrote about Mrs. Henderson's wisdom and James's humor, about the horses and cattle and land that had sustained them. Her children and grandchildren loved gathering to hear her stories, and she loved telling them, seeing her history reflected in their faces. Garrett's health began to decline when he was in his early 60s, his body worn down by decades of hard physical labor. He hated slowing down, hated admitting he could not do everything he once could, but Victoria was patient with his frustration. She had learned long ago that the key to their marriage was patience, humor, and unwavering commitment to each other. On a warm spring day, when Garrett was 65 and Victoria 61, they took a ride together on Caesar's grandson, a magnificent horse that combined the best traits of his legendary ancestor. They rode slowly to the spot where they had first confessed their love, a journey they had made countless times over the years. They sat on the grass where they had picnicked on their 5th anniversary, where they had made love under the open sky more times than they could count. The place held so many memories it felt almost sacred. "I want you to know something," Garrett said, taking her hand. "Every single day since I met you has been a gift. Even the hard days, even the days we argued or struggled or worried about money or sick children or drought. Every day with you has been exactly what I wanted my life to be." Victoria felt tears slip down her cheeks. "You have given me the world, Garrett. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. I was drowning long before that flood came, drowning in loneliness and purposelessness. You carried me out of that water and into a life more beautiful than I ever dreamed possible." They held each other as the sun began to set, two old people still as in love as they had been as young ones. When they finally rode back to the ranch, they were met by a surprise party. Their children had organized a celebration of their 35th anniversary, though it was still months away. The party lasted long into the night, with food and music and dancing. Victoria watched Garrett dance with each of their daughters, his movements slower now but still graceful. She danced with her sons, with her grandchildren, with James, who was getting older himself, but still had that mischievous twinkle in his eye. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, the family gathered on the porch. Matthew stood and raised his glass in a toast. "To my parents," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You taught us what love looks like, what commitment means, what it is to build something lasting. This ranch is our heritage, but your marriage is our inheritance. Thank you for showing us how to love well." Everyone raised their glasses, echoing to love, and Victoria and Garrett sat surrounded by the people they loved most, feeling blessed beyond measure. The years that followed were gentle. Garrett's health stabilized, and though he could no longer do heavy ranch work, he remained involved in the horse breeding program, his knowledge and experience invaluable. Victoria continued her writing and her sewing, but mostly she enjoyed her grandchildren, who now numbered 17 with more on the way. They celebrated their 40th anniversary with a quiet dinner, just the two of them. They were both in their late 60s now, gray-haired and slow-moving but still finding joy in each other's company. They sat on their porch as the sun set, holding hands as they had done thousands of times. 40 years, Victoria marveled. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you rode through that flood. Sometimes it feels like we have been together forever. Both are true, Garrett said. Every day with you feels new, but you also feel like part of me, like you have always been there. As darkness fell and the stars emerged, they remained on the porch, unwilling to go inside just yet. The ranch spread out before them, peaceful and prosperous, a testament to their hard work and love. In the distance, they could hear horses moving in the pasture, the sound as familiar and comforting as breathing. "I would do it all again," Garrett said softly. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy and sorrow, I would ride through 1,000 floods to find you. And I would wait through 1,000 storms to be found," Victoria replied. They sat in perfect contentment as the night deepened around them, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built a love story that would echo through generations. The mail-order bride who was stranded by a flood, and the cowboy who crossed the water to carry her home, together for 40 years and still counting, still loving, still grateful for the disaster that had brought them together. And there, on the porch of the ranch house they had filled with love and laughter, surrounded by the evidence of their beautiful life, Victoria and Garrett Wilder held each other close and watched the stars shine down on the home they had built together. A home founded on love and sustained by devotion. A home that would stand long after they were gone as proof that sometimes the greatest loves come from the most unexpected places, and that true love, once found, never fades.